Here's a sobering reality and an amazing opportunity. Your organisation could be bleeding 20 to 30% of its productive capacity to cognitive fragmentation. Not because your people are lazy or distracted, but because we've accidentally built work systems that make sustained focus nigh on impossible. The maths are stark. Most knowledge workers average about 3 hours of genuinely productive work per 8-hour day. So, if you could increase that to even 4 hours, you'd gain the equivalent of adding another 20 people for every 100 employees, not through heroic effort or longer hours, but by simply reducing the cognitive cost of how we structure work. It's not theory, it's validated by decades of research from MIT, Stanford, UC Irvine, Harvard, and Microsoft's own studies of billions of work patterns. Companies that have addressed this systematically, like Shopify and Asana, have reclaimed hundreds of thousands of hours annually. So today we're examining the research that explains why focus is so hard to maintain and what actually happens in your brain when work is constantly interrupted. We're hearing from 3 researchers whose work forms a scientific foundation for understanding this problem. Cal Newport on deep work and cognitive cost, Gloria Mark on attention spans and interruption patterns, and Sophie Leroy on what happens when we switch tasks. Before we begin, a quick note on format. What you're about to hear are synthesised perspectives from these researchers, read by me, Colette Easton of Zockery. These are summaries of their published work and research findings, not original interviews. So Newport's central argument, developed over years of research and observation, is that we're in the midst of a profound shift in what creates economic value. According to Newport, the ability to perform deep work, which he defines as professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push cognitive capabilities to their limit, is becoming simultaneously rarer and more valuable. The research Newport synthesises paints a troubling picture. A McKinsey study that he cites found that knowledge workers spend about 60% of their week on electronic communication and internet searching. This isn't productive creation or strategic thinking. It's what Newport calls shallow work, logistical tasks performed with divided attention that don't create lasting value. Newport argues that this matters because of a fundamental principle he draws from psychological research. The quality of what you produce is directly related to the intensity of your focus. When you work with fragmented attention, jumping between tasks and tolerating interruptions, you're not only slower, but you produce inferior work. The cognitive remnants of the previous task interfere with your ability to engage fully with the current task. What Newport finds particularly concerning is the compounding effect. He argues, drawing on neuroscience research, that spending too much time in what he calls a state of frenetic shallowness doesn't just reduce your output during those hours, it actually atrophies your brain's capacity for concentration. If you spend most of your day task switching and responding to notifications, your ability to sustain focus on difficult problems gradually degrades. It becomes harder and harder to access that state of deep concentration, even when you try. And the economic implications are significant. Newport points to research showing that in their knowledge work, the ability to work deeply on complex problems is increasingly what separates high performers from the average. In an economy where machines can handle routine cognitive work, human value lies in tackling genuinely difficult problems that require extended focus. So those who can sustain that focus are becoming disproportionately valuable, and those who can't are losing ground. Newport's research into high performers across various fields reveals a consistent pattern. They protect large blocks of uninterrupted time. They're not just more disciplined about ignoring distractions during random moments, they architect their days differently. Writers like Neil Stephenson, who produce complex, successful novels, academics who produce groundbreaking research, business leaders who solve genuinely difficult strategic problems, they all share this characteristic. They structure significant portions of their time to allow for sustained, uninterrupted cognitive work. According to Newport, one of the most damaging myths in modern work is that constant connectivity is necessary. He points to experiments, including one conducted at Harvard Business School with a major consulting firm, in which teams were required to set aside scheduled time for complete communication silence. The hypothesis was that productivity could suffer. Instead, the opposite occurred. Work quality improved. team members reported higher job satisfaction, and clients, far from being frustrated, appreciated the more thoughtful, thorough service. Newport argues that what appears to be responsiveness is often just busy work, creating the illusion of productivity. The consultant who responds to every email within minutes isn't necessarily providing a better service than the one who takes several hours to craft a thoughtful response. But our current systems reward the appearance of constant availability over the quality of actual output. The connection Newport draws to flow states is particularly important for understanding the human cost. Flow state is a state in which people are so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. Research consistently shows that people are happiest and most satisfied when in a state of flow. And flow requires exactly what our current work patterns prevent: extended periods of undistracted concentration on challenging tasks that stretch our abilities. According to Newport, when we fragment our attention throughout the day, we're not just losing productivity, we're also losing focus. We're systematically denying ourselves access to one of the most reliable sources of deep satisfaction in work. People leave the office exhausted but dissatisfied, having been busy all day without ever engaging meaningfully with work that matters. Newport's prescription is structural. Not just about individual willpower, he argues that organisations need to fundamentally rethink how they enable that focus. This means questioning assumptions about necessary connectivity, about meeting defaults, about what actually constitutes productive work. It means recognising that 4 hours of uninterrupted focus on a genuinely important problem creates more value than 8 hours of fragmented responsiveness. Newport's research establishes the economic and cognitive case. Fragmented attention isn't just inefficient, it's actively degrading your organisation's capacity to solve difficult problems. The key insight is that it isn't about individual discipline. When you see patterns across your entire organisation, that's a systems problem, not a people problem. But what exactly happens at the neurological level when attention gets fragmented? And that's where Gloria Mark's 2 decades of research become essential. Mark's research, studying 20 years of how people interact with technology and manage attention, provides the empirical data on exactly how bad the fragmentation problem has become. And her findings are stark. In studies conducted since 2004, she's documented a dramatic decline in how long people can sustain attention on any single task. According to Mark's research, when she first started studying attention spans in 2004, people spent an average of 2.5 minutes on any screen before switching. According to her most recent studies, that figure has dropped to just 47 seconds. The median, meaning half of all observation, is only 40 seconds. Think about what that means. In a typical day, knowledge workers are switching their attention every 40 to 47 seconds. But Mark's research reveals something even more troubling. We're doing this to ourselves. Her data shows that 49% of the time we self-interrupt. It's not just device notifications or colleagues stopping by. We're checking email when we don't need to. We're switching a different browser mid-task. We're picking up our phones without any external prompt. Mark argues this happens because we've conditioned ourselves to expect constant stimulation and immediate information. She's documented that people check their email an average of 77 times per day. Not because 77 emails require immediate attention, but because we've trained ourselves to constantly monitor for new information. The anticipation itself becomes a source of distraction. What makes Mark's research particularly valuable for understanding organisational productivity is her focus on the cost of interruption. When her team observed workers in their actual work environments, they found that interruptions happen every 6 to 12 minutes. Each one fragments the workday into ever smaller chunks, and her data shows that it takes an average of 23 minutes and 15 seconds to fully refocus after an interruption. So let's consider the maths of that. If you're interrupted every 10 minutes and it takes 23 minutes to refocus, you never actually achieve full focus throughout the workday. You're perpetually in a state of partial attention, constantly playing catch-up with whatever was just interrupted. Mark's research has also revealed something that she calls attention states. She's found that different people have different modes of attention throughout the day, with natural peaks in mid to late morning and mid to late afternoon for most people. These peaks align with circadian rhythms and the ebb and flow of cognitive resource. But her data shows that we typically schedule meetings during exactly these peak times, using our highest capacity hours for coordination rather than deep work. According to Mark's findings, this misalignment between when we're most capable of focused work and how we structure our days explains much of the exhaustion people feel. They leave work mentally drained because they've spent their peak cognitive hours in meetings and spent lower energy times trying to force concentration on difficult work. It's cognitively backwards. Mark's research on what she calls kinetic attention, that rapid switching between screens and tasks, reveals additional costs. She's found this constant movement creates chronic low-level stress. Heart rate variability is elevated in people who exhibit high rates of task switching. The body responds to the cognitive demand of constant reorientation as if it's a stressor. But Mark argues that attention fragmentation isn't an inevitable consequence of technology. Her research has tested various interventions. One finding is particularly relevant. Batching email, where organisations send email only 2 or 3 times per day, doesn't produce the benefits many expect. People don't necessarily feel less stressed or more productive with batched email alone. According to Mark's research, what works is more structural. Email-free days or restricted windows for sending electronic communication. This changes expectations about response times. It gives people permission to not constantly monitor. The psychological effect of knowing that you're not expected to respond immediately is way more powerful than simply batching delivery. Mark's work has also identified the importance of matching task difficulty to attention state. She's found that people have these natural rhythms with peaks and troughs throughout the day. And attempting to do the hardest, most creative work during a trough is not only inefficient, it's demoralising. People feel incompetent when they struggle with something during low attention periods that they could handle easily during a peak. According to Mark's research, one of the most practical implications is that people need to identify their own peak focus times and protect those periods for their most demanding work. Everything else, email processing, routine coordination, administrative tasks, should be scheduled for low attention periods. This requires both individual awareness and organisational support. Mark argues that the organisational culture change is significantly required. We've built work systems that implicitly value constant availability and rapid response over sustained focus. People feel guilty about blocking time on their calendars for focus work because it makes them look unavailable. Managers question whether remote workers are really working if they're not immediately responsive. These cultural assumptions directly undermine productivity. Her research suggests that organisations need to make focus work socially acceptable again. That means that leaders modelling this behaviour, protecting their own focus time and respecting others. It means changing defaults so that an immediate response is not expected. It means measuring output quality rather than response time or meeting attendance. Mark's data makes it clear that attention is a finite resource that depletes with use. Every time you switch tasks, you're slightly draining that resource. By the end of a day filled with constant switching, you're cognitively exhausted. But that exhaustion often doesn't translate to a sense of accomplishment because you spent the day reacting rather than creating. So Mark's research quantifies the problem with precision. 47-second average attention spans, interruptions every 6 to 12 minutes, and 23 minutes to refocus. These aren't isolated issues, they're systematic patterns that explain why your organisation feels perpetually busy but struggles to make progress on genuinely difficult work. But another mechanism is at play, making the situation even more costly. When you switch between tasks, even briefly, something remains behind. Sophie Leroy's research, which introduced the concept of attention residue in 2009, explains a phenomenon that anyone who works with multiple projects simultaneously has experienced but can't name. According to Leroy, when you switch from task A to task B, some of your attention remains on task A rather than fully transferring to task B. This cognitive residue impairs your performance on the new task. What makes Leroy's research particularly important for understanding workplace productivity is her investigation into why attention residue occurs. She argues that humans have a fundamental need for completion. Our brains don't like leaving things unfinished. When we're forced to switch away from an incomplete task, our cognitive system keeps part of itself engaged with that task trying to hold context and maintain readiness to return to it. According to Leroy's research, the problem is that this happens largely outside of conscious awareness. You genuinely believe you've moved on to the new task and you're trying to give it your full attention. But neurologically, part of your cognitive resource is still allocated to the previous task. You're essentially running a multiple background process simultaneously, which degrades performance across all of them. Leroy's research identified several factors that worsen attention residue. First, task incompletion. The more unfinished the previous task feels, the stronger the residue. If you were interrupted right in the middle of solving a problem, your brain has a harder time letting go than if you reached a natural stopping point. Second and more subtle is the anticipated time pressure. In Leroy's experiment, she found that people who believed they would be rushed to complete the interrupted task later showed both higher levels of attention residue and worse performance on the interrupting task. The anxiety about the upcoming time pressure kept their attention partially focused on the original task. This finding has profound implications for how we structure work. Leroy argues that the typical pattern in which people are pulled into meetings or quick interruptions with the implicit message that they need to get back to their real work creates the worst possible conditions. The person is now trying to focus on the meeting while simultaneously stressing about how they'll finish their interrupted work under time pressure. According to Leroy's research, attention residue explains why meetings often feel unproductive. People arrive at meetings with attention residue from whatever they were just working on. During the meeting, they're thinking about the work they need to return to. They're not fully present for the discussion. Key information gets missed, and decisions are not optimal because people aren't processing information carefully. Leroy's subsequent research explored whether attention residue could be mitigated. Working with a colleague, Teresa Glom, she tested what they called a ready-to-resume plan. The intervention was remarkably simple. Before switching tasks, people spent just a minute writing down where they'd left off and what they planned to do next on the interrupted task, and the results were dramatic. According to Leroy's findings, people who created ready-to-resume plans showed significantly less attention residue. More importantly, their performance on the interrupting task improved substantially. In one experiment focused on decision-making under interruption, those who created plans were 79% more likely to identify the optimal solution compared to those who didn't. Leroy argues that this works because the act of creating the plan provides a form of cognitive closure. You're explicitly telling your brain, we're not abandoning this task, we know exactly where to pick up, it's safe to let go for now. That permission to disengage allows your attention to fully transfer to the new task. But Leroy's research makes it clear that this mitigation strategy is not a solution. The fundamental problem remains: task switching, even with the best mitigation, still carries cognitive cost. According to her data, the optimal scenario is simply switching less frequently, completing tasks before moving to the new task, working in longer, uninterrupted blocks. Leroy's work on multitasking provides additional evidence for this. She's found that people who regularly work on multiple projects simultaneously report lower work engagement and experience more difficulty achieving flow state. The constant mental juggling between projects creates a persistent low-level cognitive load that never fully resolves. Leroy argues that organisations need to fundamentally rethink how they structure work to minimise these costs. That means questioning the assumption that people should be constantly available for interruption. It means designing workflows that allow people to complete meaningful chunks of work before context switching. It means recognising that the person who appears less responsive because they batch their communications might actually be more productive because they're protecting their cognitive resource. According to Leroy's research, the cost of attention residue extends beyond immediate task performance. Over time, the stress of constant task switching and the frustration of never feeling fully engaged with work contributes to burnout. People feel perpetually behind, never quite catching up, and always slightly scattered. This isn't a personal failing, it's a predictable consequence of how we've structured knowledge work. Leroy's research on attention residue explains why task switching feels harder than it should, because your brain literally hasn't fully let go of the previous task. Every switch carries a cognitive cost. These costs accumulate throughout the day, progressively degrading your available mental capacity. Now let's look at how these patterns show up in organisational data at a massive scale. Microsoft's research, based on analysing trillions of productivity signals from Microsoft 365 users globally, provides unprecedented visibility into how modern knowledge work actually functions at scale. Their findings validate everything the individual researchers have documented, but with the weight of massive data sets that reveal patterns across millions of workers. According to Microsoft's 2025 Work Trend Index, the average employee spends 57% of their time in meetings, email, and chat. Only 43% of the time is spent actually creating documents, spreadsheets, and presentations, and even that 43% is fragmented by notifications and interruptions, so sustained focus within it is rare. Microsoft's data shows that meeting load has exploded. Workers are in 3 times as many Teams meetings and calls per week compared to early 2020. But more striking than the volume is the timing. Microsoft analysis reveals that 50% of all meetings happen between 9 and 11 a.m. and 1 and 3 p.m., precisely when research shows that people have natural productivity peaks due to circadian rhythms. According to Microsoft's findings, Tuesdays carry the heaviest meeting load at 23% weekly meetings, while Fridays taper to just 16%. This creates a pattern where the most valuable hours of the most demanding days are consumed by coordination rather than creation. Microsoft's researchers describe 11 a.m. as the most overloaded hour of the day, when meetings and chat communications peak simultaneously. Microsoft survey data collected from 31,000 workers across 31 countries reveals the human experience behind these patterns. 68% say they don't have enough uninterrupted time focus during the day. Not some of the time, not occasionally, a persistent condition. When Microsoft specifically examined meeting effectiveness, they found troubling results. In their surveys, 58% of participants said it's hard to effectively brainstorm in a virtual meeting. 55% said it's hard to know what the next steps are once a meeting concludes. These aren't effective coordination mechanisms. They are time sinks that create the illusion of productivity whilst actually impeding it. The cognitive costs show up in Microsoft's data on what they call digital debt. 60% of leaders surveyed said the overwhelming volume of meetings, emails, and messages is hurting innovation. The people responsible for strategic direction recognise that their organisations are drowning in coordination overhead at the expense of creative work. Microsoft's data on meeting scheduling provides additional insight into the dysfunction. About 1 in 10 scheduled meetings are booked right before they start. 90% of one-off meetings are scheduled inside of 10 days. This creates a pattern where calendars fill up with meetings on short notice, making it nearly impossible to protect time for focus work in advance. According to Microsoft survey data, 44% of workers say they dread meetings, and the time wasted in unproductive meetings has doubled since 2019 to 5 hours per week. 48% of workers say their most recent meeting was unnecessary. 53% say it was a waste of time. 61% say little was accomplished. According to Microsoft's research, there are bright spots in that data. Some organisations and teams have fundamentally redesigned their approach to meetings and communication. These groups show dramatically different patterns. Fewer but more effective meetings. Protective focus time that's actually respected. Asynchronous communication for coordination rather than defaulting to synchronous calls. Microsoft's AI research provides some indication of potential solutions. Their studies show that AI can help by automating meeting summaries and surfacing action items, and reducing the need for everyone to attend the meeting. But their researchers caution that AI alone won't solve the problem if the underlying work structures remain dysfunctional. Let's synthesize what these 4 bodies of research tell us. From Newport, deep work. The ability to focus without distraction on cognitive demanding tasks is becoming simultaneously rarer, yet more valuable. Organisations that can enable it gain competitive advantage. Those who can't are systematically destroying their capacity to solve difficult problems. From Mark, attention spans have collapsed to an average of 47 seconds. Interruptions occur every 6 to 12 minutes. It takes 23 minutes to refocus after each one. These are not isolated incidents, they are the baseline condition of modern knowledge work. From Leroy, every task switch leaves an attention residue that impairs performance on the subsequent task. These compound throughout the day. By afternoon, people are working with a fraction of their cognitive capacity because they're carrying mental baggage from multiple incomplete tasks. From Microsoft, at massive scale across millions of workers, the patterns are clear. 57% of time in meetings and email. 68% report insufficient focus time. Peak cognitive hours are consumed by coordination. The workday is expanding indefinitely as the system tries to compensate for its own inefficiency. So, here's what this means for you as CEO. Your organisation has a hidden productivity reserve of 20 to 30%, not through heroic effort, not through longer hours, simply by systematically protecting people's cognitive resources. The opportunity is to create what you might call a time architecture, protected focus blocks, meeting-free days or half-days, batch communication windows, clear norms about response time expectations, meeting quality standards that eliminate unnecessary coordination. The companies that have done this, like Shopify with their meeting purges and Asana with their focus time initiatives, have reclaimed hundreds of thousands of hours. And that's not just time, it's your organization's capacity to tackle the genuinely difficult problems that drive growth. The question to consider: if you could help your organization move from 3 hours of truly productive work to 4, what would that enable? Which strategic initiatives that have stalled for lack of bandwidth could finally move forward? What quality improvements become possible when people can think deeply about problems rather than reacting constantly? The research is clear and the opportunity is real. The implementation challenge is primarily about system design, not individual discipline.